Busy 2 weeks in hardware news while I was out of town, but we're back now. We're filming an update on all the stuff going on. First story is going to be on EVGA. There was a power supply swap that went horribly wrong as a result of negligence on EVGA's part. However, we do have an update on that. Now that it's been out in the news for a little bit, we were able to talk to them, talk to the customer. Looks like things are moving in a positive direction, so we'll update you on that. Additionally, Apple is getting sued by the U.S. Department of Justice, so government versus Apple is a pretty large fight. We'll be talking about that one. RTX 50 series rumors have abounded as a result of the Blackwell coverage that's been up the last couple weeks. So there's a lot more news on Blackwell GPUs for consumer in the future, probably called the RTX 50 series, but we'll see. Maybe they'll surprise us, bring GTX back from the dead, or they won't. And we have some other stories. Actually, it's a really packed news episode, so it'll be a fun one. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermaltake and the Tower 300. The Tower 300 is a full-on showcase PC case built to present the computer straight on with its angled tempered glass windows or on a unique mounting stand to show off the build in new ways. The Tower 300 has a layout that positions the GPU fans against a mesh panel with ventilation on the opposite side for liquid coolers and CPUs. There's also an included two 140mm fans up top. The panels use a quick access toolless system to be quickly popped in and out for maintenance, and you can learn more at the link in the description below. All right, first one is EVGA. So while traveling last week, I got an interesting email from a viewer who spoke of a failed power supply swap. And this is a really unfortunate story for the viewer where due to negligence by EVGA's remaining RMA department, the viewer ended up with two fried storage devices. And we'll talk through that, but the basics of how this happens is mix and match cables. You should never mix and match cables. In this instance, it's not the customer's fault. However, just as a general warning, the way you make sure this doesn't happen to you is if you're swapping power supplies ever, you should also make sure the cables you're using came with the power supply. Now, normally, that wouldn't be even a thought in your mind if you're replacing your power supply with the same model power supply. I personally would not have swapped the cables. I would have left them in the system just like the viewer did here, and I would have put the new power supply brick in and connected it because it's the same model. You wouldn't think anything of it if no one told you. Unfortunately, what happened is that there was a silent and running pinout change, and that was not intentional. The pinout change itself was accidental. So the short version of the story so far is that the customer filed an RMA for the actual power supply brick, not the cables. EVGA enabled the customer to send the power supply unit in and leave the cables in the system to make the swap as easy as possible. Also slightly reduces their costs. But unfortunately, EVGA and its factory changed the pinout of the SATA cables, at least. Not sure if they changed any others. And this means that reusing the same power supply should not be done. The bigger concern is data loss. And fortunately, this particular user keeps cloud backups, it sounds like, of just about everything from talking with the user. And they lost a little bit of data, but not everything. So that's maybe the silver lining for them, and also a fantastic lesson for the rest of us. That part is all already out there, so here's the new information. I called EVGA once I got back. I also emailed the customer, trying to start figuring out what's the next steps for this story. And what happened was EVGA said there was a safety regulation running change that resulted in an update to the power supply. This was not supposed to encompass an update to the pinout, just the power supply. That was in 2022, and the change was in compliance with the IEC, which is the International Electrotechnical Commission, that issued a safety standard change, which, as we understand it, looking into it, is something that happens outside of EVGA. That's not an EVGA thing, that's an international commission thing. It kind of gets pushed out to everyone, mostly the factories. So thus far, there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of this, making a change to a product to accommodate some new international spec or guideline, or like there's an EU requirement, whatever. There's nothing wrong there. The problem came in when there's really no other way to describe it other than just a colossal fuck up where the factory, EVGA's factory, changed the pinout. This is both of their fault. This is EVGA's fault for not validating it and trusting at face value. This is the factory's fault for swapping it. So that pinout change, not necessary, but it is what makes the power supply immediately problematic if you were ever to mix and match cables from one production run to another. And EVGA said that it was internally aware of this and that over a year ago when this was all happening, it had put a plan in place to deal with this situation. It said this to us, quote, "We had set up an internal procedure for RMAs for these model numbers based on serial range to make sure the customer would get the right version for their cables. Typically, the customer just sends the brick back to us and they leave the cables in there. The procedure was in place and also stated that if for some reason EVGA did not have the correct models, customer service would send the customer a full G5 power supply, meaning with cables, with a note to let them know that they would need to upgrade their power supply so everything matches. But where we fell short is that while this policy had been enforced for the year since the change happened, due to some internal operation error, the wrong power supply brick was sent to the customer." EVGA also noted that when a customer reports damage to customer service as a result of something like this or as a result of one of their products, they have a policy where that customer's case is supposed to be escalated to senior management or to basically a director level for resolution, but in this instance, it was not escalated. EVGA said that it's in contact with the customer and it expects, quote, "an amicable resolution to take care of his case." Senior management told us that it has reviewed the points at which the policy fell apart internally for this and that it was reviewing those with customer service teams to make sure it doesn't happen again. We also sent an email to the viewer. The viewer said this, quote, "Thank you very much for getting a hold of EVGA about this. I did actually hear from a product manager there yesterday, and he seemed genuinely apologetic and wanted to make the situation right. I forwarded him receipts showing the replacement cost of the 2 drives, and his latest response yesterday afternoon was, 'Thank you for providing the extra information. Please allow me a little more time to work on this case and follow up with you.'" The viewer is restoring those backups, or will be as soon as they have new drives, and is still finalizing the details with EVGA on the resolution itself. If for any reason at all this does not reach anything other than an acceptable or better solution, then we'll follow up on it again. Most likely this is hopefully where the story ends and the customer's happy with it, but we're in contact with the viewers, so if that's not the case, then we'll let you all know. Quick update filming after the factory too. I just got word back from the viewer, and the viewer says that EVGA has resolved the issue to their satisfaction, replaced the drives, they worked everything out. Now for some quick commentary. So a few things here. First of all, just with this specific issue, this is clearly extremely negligent on part of the company. It's great to have policy, it's very important. If we take that comment at face value that basically there are policies, but due to a process error, they weren't followed, which to me sounds like maybe I don't know, they've had a lot of turnover, they've lost most of their staff. Anyone who's still there, not really sure how overworked they are, how experienced they are, it's a skeleton crew. And so whatever the case may be, it sounds like if we believe there was a policy, it just wasn't followed. And the best way to solve that is to not need the policy. And if you have something like the pinout changes and you're aware of it, to me at least, the sort of most anxiety-reducing solution to this problem would be to say, okay, the policy is if a customer has this power supply, any serial range, any year of production, you replace the whole thing. The cables, you tell them they have to replace the cables. It really seems like the best solution would be, sorry for the inconvenience. We need you to replace all of it. Unfortunately, again, EVGA is basically in skeleton crew status. This is something everyone's known for quite a while now. They left GPUs very publicly. The motherboard team left. I mean, we filmed basically their exit interview where the 2 best firmware developers there went to ASUS ROG, as I understand, or maybe one of them, and one went to another company. And we filmed that with Kingpin alongside them. So I bring that up because we've had people email recently actually about the EVGA motherboards not getting 14th gen firmware updates, which doesn't surprise us at all because there's no one there to do it. So, it's sad. That's the status the company's in now, and losing all the experienced talent means we would expect a couple things. First of all, my contacts there haven't changed, and I do believe in full faith that they do want to do the right thing for people based on what I'm hearing. The reality is that EVGA is in a reduced capacity to do the right thing, whether that's literal availability of resources or just things like you may want to support the boards, but if there's no team to do it, what do you do? There's not really a solution. So we would expect a reduced level of service, even if the intention is good. And certainly they are beyond the sort of same-day repairs we documented in our EVGA finale in the RMA facility in Taiwan. On the positive side, again, talking with the contacts at EVGA, the company does still seem to exhibit a desire to maintain the core values of supporting customers. But again, it's not at the same heights it was. They're extremely lucky in this instance that the customer had backups, because that would have been catastrophic. Lesson for you all is keep backups of your information. All right, that's the update to the EVGA story. So moving on to the Apple one. The U.S. Department of Justice is suing Apple over monopolistic behavior and for what it says is violation of antitrust laws. This is in a press release from the DOJ, which wrote, quote, Apple's broad-based exclusionary conduct makes it harder for Americans to switch smartphones, undermines innovation for apps, products, and services, and imposes extraordinary costs on developers, businesses, and consumers. Attorney General Merrick B. Garland elaborated, saying, quote, consumers should not have to pay higher prices because companies violate antitrust laws. It's a hot take, but we'll see how it goes. Adding, quote, we allege that Apple has maintained monopoly power in the smartphone market, not simply by staying ahead of the competition on its merits, but by violating federal antitrust law. If left unchallenged, Apple will only continue to strengthen its smartphone monopoly. The Justice Department will vigorously enforce antitrust laws that protect consumers from higher prices and fewer choices. That is the Justice Department's legal obligation and what the American people expect and deserve. Now, going through some specific potential anti-competitive behavior over the years, Tile, the maker of the smart tracker device, complained that Apple engaged in anti-competitive behavior with the company, saying that iOS 13.5 was designed to favor Apple's competing Find My app over its own solution by disabling the device's tracking capabilities by default, forcing users to dig through menus to enable it. Apple would then release its own competing AirTag tracker. Other potential anti-competitive behavior involves Apple forcing credit card companies to go through Apple Pay, where Apple would take a cut on transactions. In addition, Spotify filed a legal complaint against Apple where it stated the company's 30% revenue split was unfair and said that it also limited Spotify's ability to communicate with its customers about promotional deals that they can take advantage of outside of Apple's platform. Sounds very familiar to the next one, which is Epic. Similarly, on the gaming side, Apple has been involved in a legal battle against Epic Games for the past several years now, with sort of a conclusion in at least one of those battles. The Fortnite dev complained about Apple's 30% cut and being prevented from releasing its Epic Games Store on iOS devices. That legal battle did incur a court-ordered injunction against Apple that states Apple wouldn't be able to implement anti-steering measures, which means that companies would be allowed to promote the sale of their goods and services on iPhones beyond Apple's walled ecosystem that would circumvent Apple's 30% cut. Recently, however, big companies like Meta, Microsoft, X, and Match Group say that Apple is in violation of this new injunction. There's also the whole iMessage thing, where images and videos from Android users would get compressed and degraded so much when sent to Apple users that they looked like they were shot on literal potatoes, which, while delicious, especially in wedge format, don't shoot very good photos. Videos, however, moving on. Assistant Attorney General Jonathan Cantor of the Justice Department's Antitrust Division stated, quote, for years, Apple responded to competitive threats by imposing a series of whack-a-mole contractual rules and restrictions that have allowed Apple to extract higher prices from consumers, impose higher fees on developers and creators, and to throttle competitive alternatives from rival technologies. He added, quote, today's lawsuit seeks to hold Apple accountable and ensure it cannot deploy the same unlawful playbook in other vital markets. The obvious thing to point out is that Apple isn't anywhere near a literal monopoly in the sense of iOS versus Android or just phone distribution in general, where Android maintains an extremely healthy and strong market share overall. But the monopolistic accusations are related to antitrust issues in general, where Apple is behaving in such a way as to be functionally predatory of its own customers. It locks them into an ecosystem. It makes it difficult or impossible to maintain the integrity of that user's basically life as it lives on their phone if they want to move over to a different platform like Android. And so that's kind of the crux of the issue here. And these issues also lead to increased unnecessary e-waste and increased unnecessary spending due to those predatory lock-ins. It's just wholesale bad for the consumer. If the DOJ is successful with this lawsuit, it could send some shivers down the spines of some of the gigantic technology corporations as they continue to capture their customer base. And in particular, we were thinking NVIDIA might be paying very close attention to this, especially with its current situation in the AI space. Gaming, it's got plenty of market share, but AI is where there's still this evolution of licenses and contracts, potential for lock-ins, potential for these walled gardens, as Apple is often referred to as having. And so NVIDIA may be paying very close attention to this one for those reasons. Now, this would mark the third time that the Justice Department has sued Apple in the past 14 years, but the third time's the charm. As we all know, the Return of the King, Return of the Jedi, both famous thirds. This one, the Return of the Lawsuit. Looking forward to seeing how it goes. Next story, sort of a roundup of recent RTX 50 series rumors. There've been a number of them over the past 2 weeks now, so we just put them all into one story. And of course, as the Blackwell GPU got detailed at NVIDIA's recent GTC event, some of these became maybe a little more concrete. So first up, there's a leak from noted hardware leaker Copite7Kimi, who reported that NVIDIA's alleged upcoming flagship for the RTX 50 series will be codenamed GPU Core GB202 and will feature a 384-bit memory bus configuration like the RTX 4090 before it. And then Copite7Kimi expressed that they'd still like to see a 512-bit memory interface, but not this time. The tweet said, although I still have fantasies about 512-bit, the memory interface configuration of GB20X is not much different from that of 8010X. While the memory bus may not see an improvement, NVIDIA will be leveraging GDDR7 with its 50 series cards. This much is effectively confirmed at this point from GTC, with companies like Samsung speaking to their new GDDR7 lineup. So NVIDIA's VP of GPU product management stated, quote, NVIDIA is excited that our work with JEDEC has helped to make PAM signaling the foundational technology for GDDR7, helping customers get the most performance out of their GPU. This comment was made in a JEDEC press release, and it suggests that at least some of NVIDIA's upcoming 50 series cards may use GDDR7, if not all of them. In actually a lot of the generations past, NVIDIA will mix and match the different current GDDR technologies to enable lower cost products, stay lower cost. So depending on if they want to make anything lower end than a 60 class card, although that may get the bump down too, but depending on what they're trying to target for price, we may still see some usage of some form of GDDR6 as well. So this came into play when via Twitter, Copite7Kimi was asked by someone what speed GDDR7 will run at out of the gate, and responded with 28 gigabits per second, presumably based on some kind of leaked information. We don't need leaks where we're going though, because there's some official information as well, but even 28 as a starting point would be a relatively large jump over what the 4090 offers. The current memory speed for the 4090 is effectively 21 gigabits per second, depending on if you want to use actual or effective numbers. Now, Samsung had its own comments in a JEDEC press release as well, and Samsung showed that there's some headroom for improvement here in GDDR7 technology, where they expect their speeds to go upwards of 32 gigabits per second. And NVIDIA often tweaks the range, the speed of its memory, depending on how late in the product cycle it is, how mature the memory is, the cost. So it really wouldn't be a surprise to see anything from 28 to 32 and everything in between for these cards. NVIDIA recently showcased its Blackwell GPU architecture at GTC for AI acceleration. We talked about that in a separate video. We normally cover the super high-end data center stuff just because it's cool and interesting, even though it's not sort of core to our coverage, because it eventually works its way into consumer. And Copite7Kimi asserted that GB202, quote, will use the same process node as GB100, which is NVIDIA's dual die data-centric GPU. The leaker continued and said, quote, "I must clarify once again that TSMC 4N is based on TSMC 5, not 4 nanometer. Adding, at least there is a 30% increase in density." The biggest current expectation here is that there would be an increase in L1 cache compared to the 30 and 40 series based on the leaks that are out there now. So that it's kind of in step with what NVIDIA was talking about with the 40 series. We covered this, but one of its biggest weaknesses was the 4060 and 4060 Ti especially, where the 4060 Ti was often embarrassing positioning compared to the 3060 Ti. And that was largely because of the choices that NVIDIA made for memory bandwidth via the bus. And this was supposed to be helped by the cache changes on the 4060 Ti, which is superior to the 3060 Ti's for the cache solution, but it just didn't work out the way that maybe NVIDIA had hoped, especially at higher resolutions where the cache wasn't making up for the bandwidth reduction. So anyway, increase in cache is a good thing. Memory speed goes up, then maybe some of those other issues will be resolved as well. What remains to be seen is if NVIDIA will keep its multi-chip approach for the consumer cards and to which cards that will apply, because for cost considerations, depending on how they're deploying the technology in consumer, it may be one of those things that divides the ultra high-end from everything else, but at the same time, going with multi-chip approach, multi-die approaches is supposed to be a cost-saving mechanism. So if they're able to scale that down to the low end, whether it's this coming generation or the next one, theoretically, that should make the cards cheaper to produce like for like than they are today, barring other cost concerns like just generally rising wafer prices and allocation. All right, perhaps one of the worst kept hardware secrets of late was the Intel 14900KS. And Intel has finally announced it and released it. And it's really only in here to kind of make fun of, because as leaks were correct to point out, the CPU carries a relatively boring increase in clock speed. It moves up to 6.2 gigahertz for the max advertised turbo frequency. That is an increase of about 200 megahertz from the 13900KS that came before it. It's about the same over the 14900K non-appended S, and that's kind of boring. So pricing's expensive. The 14900KS is $730 compared to the 14900K non-S appendage, which is $545 right now, both just through the same retailer on Newegg. So that's a huge premium. It's not worth it at all. We don't need to review the part and run 30 chart publication to tell you it's not worth buying. It is not worth buying. That's the review. This is it. It's contained in one sentence in this news video. You're welcome. We've saved you the time. So the only way this might make sense is if you want a better chance at a good bin for any kind of extreme overclocking, competitive overclocking. If you're an enthusiast in that sense, where you're genuinely going to push it to limits and you have some experience doing so with other Intel CPUs, great. But if you're going to put it in a socket and just run it stock, then that is a massive amount of extra money to spend for not that much performance. And first of all, you could also just buy a 14900K, overclock it to the same amount relatively easily, and that's free. So power consumption also for running the 14900KS with that increase in clocks will be substantial, and that materializes as cost as well. So our opinion of it, the mini review encapsulated here, is you would be better off spending that extra $100 on literally any other part in your computer. If you want performance, go spend it on a GPU or on better memory. $100 will get you way better memory. So that may be the best move. Or you keep the money. It's a fascinating concept, but keeping it may be a better use for it also. It never hurts to save a little. The CPU is compatible with existing Z790 and Z690 motherboards. Intel is recommending that users install the latest BIOS. We, however, recommend that you don't buy it at all. Next story is other Intel news. This one a little more positive, sort of. They need to go further still, but it's getting better. So this is about Intel's APO, which we tested previously. This is the application optimization technology. At launch, APO is basically a tech demo for only some 14 series CPUs. It wasn't even all of them. And it was a means to try and provide some reason to buy the 14 series over the 13 series because they were that similar. Now, unfortunately, at launch, it only worked with one game and kind of two. Asterisk there is that the second game was just, it's aged out of relevance in any meaningful way. But APO basically optimizes scheduling and management of threads for the CPU in games like Rainbow Six and Metro were the ones that it supported at launch. And it works. We saw that it works. It was cool that it worked. It's pretty interesting that it's just a software switch. It did require some effort in those early days to get it installed, working properly. You have to enable something in BIOS, but it actually did do something. So what Intel's trying to do is make it useful. They've added support now, and the list includes support for Final Fantasy XIV, which is a definitely relevant title, Red Dead Redemption 2, World of Tanks, Dreams at Three Kingdoms 2, which we're not familiar with, F1 22, Guardians of the Galaxy, Rainbow Six Siege, which was already supported, Serious Sam 4 with Vulcan, Strange Brigade with Vulcan, Watch Dogs Legion, Metro Exodus, World War Z, Dirt 5, World of Warcraft, and then for CPU support, they've expanded that list as well, but it's still 14 series here. So Intel stated that on desktop CPUs, they're optimized for the 14900K, the 14900KF, 14700K, 4700KF, and the recently released 14900KS. On the mobile side, supported CPUs include the 14700HX and 14900HX, but game support is more limited on those processors with the omission of 5 titles, including Final Fantasy, Red Dead 2, World of Tanks, Dreams 3 Kingdoms, Serious Sam 4, and Watch Dogs Legion. So if you want to try it out, it does actually work. We haven't tested it on these newly supported games. There's no reason, as long as they're saying it's enabled, it's functioning now, no reason it shouldn't work on those as well. It's just the question is how much does it benefit performance? And so that will depend on your GPU. But we talked about it in the past. There's a video if you want to learn more about it. And to enable it, you would need to have one of the supported CPUs, which is 14 series, unfortunately. And then you need to enable Intel's dynamic tuning technology. There's a toggle in BIOS you need to flip as well. I think we talked about that in the original coverage. But we're still waiting for Intel to support this in a big way. It's a move in the right direction. It's just that the move is still kind of boring because the biggest complaint was that this was clearly a way to try and sell 14 series and make 14 series interesting, which is literally the same architecture as the 13 series. In fact, if you look up the 14 series, the code name for the product contains the word refresh, which indicates how the same it is, and yet the 13 series wasn't supported. Now, we talked to Intel back when we originally did that coverage, and the comment they had was that they wanted to limit how many CPUs they were doing validation for, and so the 14 series made the most sense to them, which, you know, believe that however much you want, but at the end of the day, they need to expand the CPU list still for us to really care a lot about it. All right, crypto miners are now snatching up AMD CPUs. So crypto miners are back. They're coming for your CPUs this time. That's right, they're gonna come take them from you. That's how it works. It's some kind of Mad Max dystopian future, except instead of gasoline, we're robbing each other of CPUs for mining. TechSpot reports that miners are buying AMD Ryzen CPUs, quote, in bulk, with the R9 7950X specifically being in particular demand due to AVX support for the AVX 512 and AVX 2 instruction sets, which the publication notes as being key to mining rigs today for CPUs on the coins that it applies to. Cubic was singled out as one of the main coins that's benefited from this and from the Ryzen CPUs. According to TechSpot, the 7950X in particular can be more lucrative than an RTX 4090 GPU for mining, which is partly due to the prohibitive cost of the card. This news comes hot off the heels of Bitcoin reaching a new all-time high of over $73,000. It then plummeted, and invariably, line will go up again, line will go down, line will go up, and the cycle will repeat until the heat death of the universe. That is just what it does. If you've been holding out to upgrade to Zen 5, though, when that comes out, the situation may worsen with Twitter leaker Kepler L2, who's been included in several news stories in the past, writing that, quote, most CPU mining algos use AVX 512, where Zen 5 has 2 times the performance of Zen 4. So we'll see if people still care when that comes out to use them for mining. But we were able to sneak a reporter inside of an actual CPU mining enclave, and the reporter was able to snap some undercover photos. Here's what we learned. Up next, according to Bloomberg, Sony is pausing production on the PlayStation VR 2 until it, quote, clears a backlog of unsold units. The publication adds that, quote, sales of the $550 wearable accessory to the PlayStation 5 have slowed progressively since its launch, and stock of the device is building up. Bloomberg reports that Sony has produced well over 2 million headsets since the PSVR 2 launched in February 2023, a little over a year ago. This report follows recent news of mass layoffs at Sony, which hit its VR divisions particularly hard with the shuttering of the PlayStation London office and layoffs at Guerrilla Games. We noted a couple weeks ago in a different story that Sony said it is also, quote, testing the ability for PSVR 2 players to access additional games on PC to offer even more game variety in addition to the PSVR 2 titles available through PS5. Paint this how you want. It could be them just trying to sell more units in a completely normal way. It could be them trying to get rid of the stock before killing the product and discontinuing it. It could be a desperate move for them to drive gamers to purchase the headset while it tries to fill gaps in its dearth of content. Either way, that's kind of the news as we know it now. Up next, Best Buy has discounted both versions of the ASUS ROG Ally. This one's kind of interesting because the $400 non-extreme Z1 Ally is instantaneously much more interesting than it was when it was its launch price. And so Patrick and I had a discussion about if we thought it's worth it now. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the high-end model comes with the Z1 Extreme processor. It's called the ROG Ally. The other one is called the ROG Ally. We talked about this before, but it has the non-extreme processor, and there's a specifically large cut in the CUs for the RDNA GPU that's included. So that can manifest itself in big ways for performance that originally we didn't think it really felt worth it to save $100 but lose that much of the maximum potential of the SoC in the solution. So it was $700 for the Z1 Extreme version of the Ally originally, $600 for the non-extreme one, and then the lower end model now is selling at a big dip from $600 to $400, whereas the Z1 Extreme version has dropped from $700 to $600. It's done that a couple times now. Our original review of the Ally non-extreme noted that it just felt kind of bad buying the worst version of the product for what was at the time a relatively small price swing. At $400 though, ASUS is now competing with Valve's cheapest decks. It's hard to know how long these prices will last, but it puts pressure on the competition, namely the recently released MSI Claw, which starts at $700, the Lenovo Legion Go, which also costs about $700 plus or minus a bit, and Valve's Steam Deck OLED, which starts at $550 and goes down to $400 for the LCD model. And then these prices might be plus or minus $50 when the video goes live, just because each manufacturer is regularly changing the price by about $50 almost week to week. We'll flash through some charts of our original Z1 non-extreme review just so you have some comparison data. That was primarily focused on the two Allies against each other. The deck was not really a major factor in that particular benchmark, but you can see our more recent test with the Legion Go if you want all that data. So in that review, we didn't think the non-extreme Ally was worth it. $400, however, makes it far more interesting. Patrick and I have worked on all the handheld reviews together as a collaborative effort. So I asked him one question yesterday, which was if someone simply doesn't have the money to spend more, but does have about $400 they can spend on one of these, would it make sense to buy the non-extreme Ally at that point, the cheapest deck LCD, or would we rather recommend that they save until they have $600 for something better? Patrick thought about it for a moment. He said if $400 is the hard limit, he would personally buy the Z1 non-extreme Ally over the same price to LCD deck. It wasn't an instant choice for him. He personally would prefer to save a little more if possible and buy one of the better units. For me, I currently prefer Valve's grip design to ASUS's and find the Proton frame time pacing to be really impressive, just in a cool technology sort of way, so that's fun. At the same time, I need Windows if the device is going to have any chance at being a backup for my laptop on the road, and I'd probably end up also with the Ally non-extreme if only for that reason, although I also would prefer to save more if that were an option. For both of us, the reason we really kind of lean towards saving more if that's available to you, and we understand obviously sometimes you got to set a cap and that's it. And at that point, at least $400 now gets you something decent. But if you are able to save, the reason we like it is just because it opens up a lot of options in terms of competition, where now you start having other vendors enter and just other models from Valve as well. So it really opens up kind of the floodgate for what you're able to buy if you increase. But at least 400 is a decent starting point now. All right, Valve is launching Steam Family as a new feature. This is an expansion of some of its existing Steam Family features. And this is an opt-in beta state right now. It replaces Steam Family Sharing and Steam Family View. According to Valve, it gives, quote, a single location to manage which games your family can access and when they can play. You're able to invite up to 5 family members to it, and sharing works as a two-way street, meaning you share copies of games in your library and you can play copies of games that your family members have purchased. And that's family members as it's defined within the digital platform. Steam Families allows you to isolate your own save game states. That's actually pretty cool. Your own achievements and your workshop files. So you are able to quarantine those if someone else wants to play the same game and not interfere with each other. You can also play a copy of a family member's game even if they're offline or if they're on Steam but playing a different game. But you can't play the same copy of a particular game at the same time if only one purchase has been made. This is an expansion on Steam's existing family sharing features, which were more limited in this regard. Now, Valve says Steam Families was designed with immediate family members in mind, and because it's conceivable that people can abuse this, look at Netflix, Valve allows game developers to opt their titles out of Steam Families completely. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus if you want to throw a few bucks our way, and go check out some of our recent engineering discussions and interviews. We've posted a couple with Tom Peterson from Intel. We have one more that will be going up soon with him, and then we have a few from other people like with NVIDIA engineering and someone from Height coming up as well. So check back for all that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.